We are going to cover 3 chapters tonight. Tiffany took that as a challenge, so we'll see how it goes. I always encourage questions and interaction, of course, but we're covering 3 chapters tonight, just so you know. We're not going to read much of chapter 7. There is a lot of repetition. What chapter 7 is about is the offerings made for the services of the tabernacle. All right, so the first blank, the offerings here, the carts and the oxen, were for the purpose of transporting the tabernacle and its furnishings. So that's the first 9 verses, the transportation of the tabernacle. They've anointed it, sanctified it, the instruments, the altar, the vessels, and had anointed them and sanctified them. And so you have heads of each tribe, and I've got these marked in my Bible. Obviously, you don't have to do that, but verse 12, 18, 24, 30, and so on, down through the chapter, shows you the heads of each, one head of each tribe, and then the offerings that they presented. If you want to read what the offerings were, you can start, you can read verses 12 through 18 and read about the tribe of Judah and what they offered. And then every other tribe offered the same thing in service for the purpose of the service of the tabernacle. But let's talk about this transportation issue first, because that, what I was just talking about, covers essentially verses 10 through 89. So the offerings were for the purpose of transportation. You have verse 7. We'll start in verse 4 here. The Lord spoke unto Moses, saying, Take it of them, that they may be to do the service of the tabernacle of the congregation, and thou shalt give them unto the Levites, to every man according to his service. So we talked about the Levites who and what they would do. Of course, we looked at the layout of the camp of Israel and where they would be. You've got the Kohathites down here to the south. You've got the Merarites to the north, and the Gershonites to the west, between the tabernacle and 3 tribes. We're not going to go over all of that again, but each of those tribes had particular responsibilities in either the constructing or the deconstructing of the tabernacle when the Israelites would move. And all of that, I've laid that out for you in your outline. The Gershonite responsibilities, chapter 4, verses 21 to 28, and the Merarites, 4, 29 to 33, and the Kohathites, Numbers 4, 1 through 15. Now, the Gershonites and the Merarites, the things that they were responsible for, again, you go back and read those particular texts, and they required some form of transportation, because you're dealing with the curtains, the screens, the boards, everything that makes up the structure of the tabernacle, like the shell, you might say. So they have to have something to carry all that on. And it's, as it says there, as the verse we just read, it's you give it to them according to his service. Verse 5. So as many carts and oxen as they need, that's what they would get so they could transport their stuff. So, verse 7. Two carts and 4 oxen he gave to the sons of Gershon according to their service, and 4 carts and 8 oxen. So there are 6 carts, 12 oxen, 2 per cart, obviously. And they're going to, when it's time to move, what was the sign that it's time for the camp of Israel to move? Pillar of cloud and pillar of fire. When it goes up, it's time to move. They'd have to load everything up and go. When those things stop, they stop and unload. So that's what the first 9 verses are all about, really. There's not really any comment to be made, although there is a second blank here. The Kohathites' responsibilities, everything they did was carried on poles, not carts. And if you remember the account of Uzzah, when David wants to bring the Ark of the Covenant back to Jerusalem, what did he put it on? A cart with cows. That's not how it was supposed to be transported, and it wasn't transported by the right people. So that's essentially the Uzzah incident. You cannot take liberties with God's specifics. When He tells you how to do something, you do it. And you don't deviate from that course. So those are your first 9 verses. Any questions or comments on any of that? It seems, so far as I can tell, it was there. It stayed there. Yeah. Because the sign was when it was taken up, they took up. Yes. Yes. Verses 10 through 89, you've got 12 days of presenting gifts for the work of the bronze altar. Now, again, as you can see, the layout of the tabernacle here, the bronze altar is obviously exterior of the tabernacle itself. But this is where you had to offer sacrifices first, and then you would cleanse yourself with the brass laver, and then the priest, could enter the holy place to do his service in the tabernacle. That's what verses 10 through 89 is about. And again, if you want to read all those verses, all you have to do is read verses 12 through 17. You would see what was offered, and every tribe did that. And they did it one tribe, one day at a time. It lasted for 12 days. There's just not a lot to say about that. Any questions or comments on chapter 7? Okay. Chapter 8, the lampstand, cleansing, and the priestly age. Well, I meant to do this real quick. So you've got, I don't have all the pictures. I've got some of them blocked. But the Ark of the Covenant, which of course is in the most holy place. Here's the golden lampstand. This is what we're getting ready to talk about. So I'll leave that up there. And then I found a kind of an interesting second image to help us understand what's going on here. So chapter 8, verses 1 through 4. Somebody read those for me, please. Okay, so you've got the candlestick itself, but I found this image, which I thought was pretty interesting. And this is a, what do you call it? Replica. So the candlestick is its own thing, but then there are individual lamps that you could, because, well, the New King James, reading the New King James, it sounds a little bit differently. Verse 3, for instance. The King James says, He lighted the lamps thereof over against the candlestick. I don't know what that means. I'm a little slow. The New King James says, and Aaron did so, he arranged the lamps to face toward the front of the lampstand. Okay, I can picture that. Well, so it's not just like wax candles sitting here. These are actual lamps that you could remove and put on the lampstand, and their light was to be facing the proper direction. All right, so that's, like I said, that's kind of a replica of what that lampstand might look like and the lamps that were on the lampstand. So, not a lot of comment to be made on that. Other than, I do have this underlined in my Bible. You got the end of verse 3, as the Lord commanded Moses, and then you have the end of verse 4, according to the pattern which the Lord had shown Moses. So you've got that throughout the book of Exodus, really beginning from chapter 25 all the way through chapter 40. You have this emphasis on them doing exactly what God says do based on the pattern. You see that principle throughout the book of Leviticus, and now we see it again in Numbers. It just constantly reappears that when they were doing this, in the initial phases of the priesthood, they're doing everything the way God said to do it. Now, as Israel's history goes on, things go south, and it really doesn't take all that long. But they stop doing what God says do. Verses 5 through 22, you've got the cleansing of the Levites. Verse 7 specifies the cleansing process. So somebody read Leviticus. Nope. Numbers 8, verse 7.
Thus you shall do to them to cleanse them. Sprinkle water of purification on them, and let them shave all their body, and let them wash their clothes, and so make themselves clean.
Okay. You can read a little bit about the cleansing process, the priestly order, all of that in Hebrews chapters 9 and 10. So the question is, all right, we're sitting here, the New Testament church, in 2025, talking about this practice. What is this? Who cares? What's the point? Any thoughts on that? Okay. You've got God's specific requirements, and as I've already pointed out, you've got their obedience to all that thus far. Well, I mean, other than Nadab and Abihu, of course, but up to this point, you've got their specified obedience. Any other thoughts on that? Ideas why we might want to read this sometimes? Okay. Who said that? Yeah, be grateful for the New Testament. Yeah, reverencing God, and that they are being consecrated in this whole process too. Do what, Joe? Romans 15:4. Whatever was written beforehand was written for our learning. Yeah. I'm looking at Hebrews chapter 9, and it's talking about the priests going into the first part of the tabernacle, performing his services. He only went to the second part of the tabernacle once a year. It talks about their various washings, their gifts, their sacrifices, their fleshly ordinances. And then in Hebrews 9:9 it says, it was symbolic for the present time. There are symbols. It's one of the ways that it's sometimes worded is types and shadows. These are shadows of things that are to come. And we've done this before. I did it, I think maybe when we were in Exodus. So looking at the structure, the furniture of the tabernacle, okay, if you could make a parallel, before you could be cleansed in the laver and enter into the tabernacle, there was a sacrifice that had to be made first, right? Well, before you can be cleansed in the waters of baptism and enter into the body of Christ, there was a sacrifice that was made. Of course, Jesus. Well, once you're in the tabernacle, you've got three things in the holy place. You've got the altar of incense. What does the book of Revelation refer to incense as? The prayers of the saints. Very good. The table of showbread. What might that be a shadow of? Lord's table. The lampstand. What do you think that might be a representation of? Or a shadow of? Light. God's Word. Your Word is a lamp to my feet, a light to my path. Well, of course, you have the veil which separated the holy place from the most holy place. And Hebrews 9 tells us that He removed that veil with His flesh and opened the entrance into the most holy place, which is where God is. So, the veil of the temple was torn from top to bottom when Jesus died on the cross, wasn't it? So there is symbolism throughout, and that is not insignificant. Something we should not forget. All right. If they're going to perform in the service of the tabernacle, yes. They stood out, for sure. Well, and one thing, too, is all the priests were Levites, but not all the Levites were priests. That's something to think about, too. Yes. These are the ones serving in the tabernacle. They had to follow what it says there in verse 7 in order to be cleansed, as it says. 2 bulls are offered, one for a sin offering, one as a burnt offering, along with a grain offering, verses 8 and 9. And again, all of these sacrifices. So each tribe has offered something, going back to chapter 7. And to me, there's even a parallel there. Every tribe offers something of value and function to the service of the tabernacle. Well, that's no different. It shouldn't be any different from the church. What do I contribute to the functioning of the body of Christ? Or do I just warm a pew every now and then? That's something to think about, isn't it? So, a lot of lessons to learn. The Israelites would lay hands on them and offer them as a wave offering to the service of the tabernacle, verses 10 through 12. Let's see. The Levites were separated to God for service, and that's verses 14, 17, and 18. And then your next blanks here. The Levites were to serve from the ages of 25 to 50. Ages 25 to 50. And then I have this. There's a repeated emphasis on obedience. That's your last blank in that section. Verse 4, 20, and 22, all there in chapter 8. As the Lord commanded. Any questions on chapter 8? Oh, yeah. He was 3 years older than Moses, and Moses was 80 when he delivered the children of Israel out of Egypt. So he's 83-ish, somewhere in that neighborhood. Well, no, because this stuff's going on 2 years after they left Egypt. So he's 85-ish, somewhere in that neighborhood. Yep. Right? These are laws for the Levites that are being established here. Yeah. I'm trying to think here. Yeah. I'll take that. Did you hear that? He would have been grandfathered in. Yeah. And remember, this is still the initial establishing of everything. The processes of the service, who can serve and how they have to serve. All of it's just now being set up. And so from this point on, they're going to serve from the ages of 25 to 50. There was no requirement like that before, obviously, because there was no tabernacle. This is the starting point of all this. Was that a trick question? I think that was a trick question. No, I don't. Oh, we got two questions. Go ahead. I don't know. When I think of Hellenism, that's like in Acts 6. That's a Roman cultured Jew. Yeah. So that would have this would have predated all of that. I thought he said Aaron. He said Aaron. Oh, okay. So scratch that question? Okay. All right. Did you have a question, Brother Mike? Yes, and Hebrews uses that terminology too, because that's where it originates. Aaron and his sons, Nadab, Abihu, Eleazar, and Ithamar. Yeah. But then, and that's even talked about here in chapter 8. If you look down, for instance, at verses 17 and 18, when God brought the Israelites out of Egypt, He took the firstborn, right? The firstborn are mine. Well, now the Levites replace that. The Levites are His. They are strictly dedicated to His service. Again, that's why they don't get a land inheritance. They get the cities around Jerusalem. So this is all just in its beginning processes, 2 years after leaving Egypt. Yes. Yeah, these are the priests in general. Yeah, there was one high priest at a time, but there could be multiple other priests. And Hebrews even talks about that. And it shows us, too, that even during right before AD 70, there were still priests daily offering sacrifices at the temple. We haven't gotten that far yet. I don't know the answer to that question. Not that I know of, I'll say that. Yeah. Well, it could be, but this predates, Aaron's service as the priest predates this stuff anyway. All right. Okay, so there's the altar of burnt offering, where they're bringing these things to offer. And that the little man there, that's a 6-foot scale. So you can see how big this altar is, where they would offer these burnt offerings. And then you have the instruments too. All right. Any other questions on chapter 8? Okay, chapter 9. And I wanted to spend more time here in chapter 9 anyway, because of some of the lessons. 2 years out, chapter 9, verse 1, they are going to celebrate the Passover. Notice the specificity here, at its appointed time, which is the 14th day of the first month. And we learned that back in Leviticus, Exodus chapter 12, but also in Leviticus chapter 23. 14th day of this month at twilight, you shall keep it at its appointed time. According to its rites and ceremonies, you shall keep it. And so, they do that, verse 5, the end of verse 5, according to all that the Lord commanded Moses, so did the children of Israel. But there's a problem. You read verses 6 through 14, and there were some people, some individuals who had been defiled by a dead body, verse 6. And so, being defiled, they couldn't keep the Passover. And so, well, what do we do about that? And I like Moses' response here. Well, that's your next blank, by the way. A secondary Passover for those unable to observe the proper time. Moses' response is a response that we need to have when people say, why do you guys do it this way? Well, I'm gonna let the Lord speak for that. Let me consult with God about that. Somebody turn over real quick. Read for me. Isaiah chapter 8 and verse 20. Isaiah 8:20. And this is a good principle just in general for any type of religious discussion.
To the law and to the testimony, if they do not speak according to his word, it is because there is no light in them.
I have to appeal to the law of God. It doesn't matter what I think. My opinion doesn't matter. So that's exactly what Moses does here. Some guys, so far as I can tell, they were defiled by the dead body of a man so that they could. So far as I can tell, it's something beyond their control. And the reason I think that is because what the rest of the text says. Speak unto the children of Israel, verse 10. If any man of you or of your posterity shall be unclean by reason of a dead body, or be in a journey afar off, yet he shall keep the Passover of the Lord. So, the idea here is, your next blank, Moses obviously does the right thing, verse 8 here, but there were extenuating circumstances. Extenuating is your next blank. Just do your best. Extenuating. What is that? What is that? An extenuating circumstance. We use that language. Yeah, something that you didn't expect, that's out of your control, something out of the ordinary, as Kevin says. And so that's why I think whatever happened up here in verse 6 with these men who were defiled, it's like something they couldn't control, maybe. Okay, so if that happens, you're a long way off, you're defiled by a dead body. The 14th day of the second month, at even, they shall keep it, and eat it with unleavened bread and bitter herbs. Well, that's required with the normal timing, isn't it? Same thing. They shall leave none of it until morning. Same requirement of the initial Passover. Nor break any bone of it. According to all the ordinances of the Passover, they shall keep it. So there is an allotment here for something that was beyond people's control who wanted to observe the Passover. So we'll come back to that in just a minute. However, if you are clean, that is, you're not defiled by a dead body or anything, you're not on a long journey, you were to keep it on the 14th day of the first month. This went for the Israelites and for any Gentile that lived among them, verse 14. So, let's go to 2 Chronicles chapter 30 and spend a minute here, because we actually see this happen later in Israel's history. Just, thinking about it right now, could you draw some parallels in your mind with worship today? Let me ask it to you this way. Are there legitimate reasons for not coming to worship? Of course there are. Of course there are. Are we considered, if you're sick and you don't come to church, as we say, have you forsaken the assembly? You have not forsaken the assembly. You're not in sin. You've not done anything wrong. That's an extenuating circumstance. Now, travel might be a different story. One of the things that we do when we're going on vacation or we're going somewhere, one of the first things we do once we've decided where we're going is we look for a church in that city. Because when we're on vacation, we're still Christians, as far as I know. You're not just a Christian at home. You need to find a place to go to worship when you're not in town. That's not an extenuating circumstance. Now, you might find yourself in a place where there is no church. There is no local body of Christ. Well, then you have to take matters into your own hands. You can worship in your room. You don't just leave God out. There's no excuse for that. But for whatever reason, I've known a lot of people over the years that when they're on vacation, from everything they're on vacation, even the assembly. 2 Chronicles chapter 30, we're reading about Hezekiah. He's one of the few good kings. He's a reformer king. Start reading in chapter 29 about him. But they've not been keeping the Passover. And so he's now on the throne. He's restoring things. Chapter 30, verses 1 and 2. Hezekiah sent all Israel and Judah and also wrote letters to Ephraim and Manasseh that they should come to the house of the Lord at Jerusalem to keep the Passover. For the king and his leaders and all the assembly in Jerusalem had agreed to keep the Passover in the second month. Now that was permitted, wasn't it? We just read that in Numbers chapter 9. For they could not keep it at the regular time because a sufficient number of priests had not consecrated themselves, nor had the people gathered together at Jerusalem. Well, there are your two extenuating circumstances. These things are out of the norm. You've had an apostasy from the law, and Hezekiah is trying to get things back in order and doing what he can with what he has. You read verses 15 through 19 in 2 Chronicles chapter 30, and they did exactly what was required, as we just read in Numbers chapter 9. But not only that, Hezekiah sends postmen or runners throughout the land telling everybody to come. I circled these words from verses 6 through 9. Return, return, yield, serve, return. Because God is gracious, merciful, if you return. We've got to get back to doing things the right way. Do you think that same principle can be applied to churches today? That's a question. Huh? If not, why not? What'd you say? Yeah, of course. This is restoration, isn't it? It's going back to the law, seeing what the law says, and doing what the law says. And so they're overcoming these extenuating circumstances and doing exactly what God required of them. Get down to verse 15. They slaughtered the Passover lambs on the 14th day of the second month, as was required. The priests and the Levites were ashamed and sanctified themselves and brought the burnt offerings to the house of the Lord. They are in the process of, again, restoration. They're in the process of repentance. They stood in their place, verse 16, according to their custom, according to the law of Moses, the man of God. There you go. They did what they could, even in difficult circumstances. Somebody read verse 20. God listened because they repented. And they did whatever they could. And it's not just that they did whatever they could. They did what they could based on what the law said. So you act, again, this going back to Numbers chapter 9, okay, this might happen in the future, here's what you do. Well, we actually see that happening in 2 Chronicles chapter 30. So, making modern day application. Okay, if you're sick, we don't want you here. Okay, I don't want what you've got. Stay at home. And the reason I'm saying that and emphasizing that is because, and I know this has been talked about a lot, but since 2020 and everything that happened and the reaction and everything that's happened has changed a lot of different things and a lot of people's perspectives. And there are a lot of people that I know who, if they are sick, they feel guilty about not coming to worship. What if you have a loved one who is at home, who is not at home, who is homebound, and you have to stay there to take care of them? Are you forsaking the assembly when you do that? No, you're not. That's a circumstance that's beyond your control. So again, I think there were some good things that came out of all of that. But I think there were some very bad things. And I think one of the bad things is the guilt sometimes that people experience when they are... It's not that they're just missing worship. It's that they're not able to be there. And I think the live streaming fed that a lot. And there are pros and cons to that too. It's a tool. Okay? The live stream can be used as a tool. But you're not assembled with us if you're watching a live stream on Sunday. You're not with us. We need to know that. It can be used as an aid, like that circumstance, okay, you're on vacation, there's no local congregation. You can use that as an aid. But you need to worship. And if you don't have any cell phone service, so you can't watch a live stream, I just can't worship. No, that's not how that works. And I've told this before. I remember when I was a kid, the congregation I grew up in Ohio, nursing homes and shut-ins, after the morning service, there would be somebody who would take the communion to the nursing home and the shut-ins. But that's all they would do. That doesn't cut it. Is there nothing else we do in worship to God than communion? Oh, get their money while you're there too. Forgot about that one. So there have been pros and cons with everything that's happened in the last 5 years. And some people still struggle with guilt. But one thing that I learned from Numbers chapter 9, if you're not able, God does not require of you what you are not able to do. So I think we need to think about that too. Yes. Yes.
Being sick is most definitely a valid reason, but having a headache and being sick are two different things.
Yeah.
And you each have to look at that on an individual basis. And like I say, God knows, so we can fool somebody else sometimes. We're not going to fool God. We have to be very honest with ourselves and talk about that.
Yeah.
And we also have to look, I think we have to look at it, I think there's going to be even more required from us because we have so many conveniences. We're talking about these people who live with all the sacrifices that they had to do, all the physical work that went into doing the sacrifices, not to mention the travel, all by foot or by animal. And we've got vehicles and we've got computers and phones and all this stuff. I think a lot more is going to be required of us.
Yeah. Steve makes several excellent points here. Number one, we have to be honest with ourselves about this, about worship. I can't tell you how many times over the years I've known people, and by knowing people, I mean I know them. They weren't at church Sunday because they didn't feel well, but they're at work first thing Monday morning. Now, that can happen, right? That can happen. I'm not making a blanket condemnation of that, but it happens a lot sometimes with certain folks. They just don't feel good on Sunday, so I'll stay home and watch the live stream. Well, if you're sick, okay, but you just don't feel like it, but you sure feel like going to work because there's a paycheck at the end of the week. You need your hours. So be honest with yourself. Be honest with God, because above all, He knows. He knows. And then the third point he made, which is a good point too, is more is going to be required of us because of how easy it is. You know, the travel, the sacrifice, everything we've been studying through Leviticus and Numbers, that was difficult. It is nothing. Let's just be honest. It is nothing for us to get in an air-conditioned car, to sit in an air-conditioned building for an hour or two a Sunday, or 3. So, yeah. To whom much is given, of him much shall be required. So, I think it's important to understand the guilt problem that people suffer from. And sometimes there's nothing to feel guilty about. But at other times, maybe there is. Any questions or comments? Any thoughts on that? We're about out of time, so if you haven't, make it quick. Okay? Chapter 9, verses 15 to 23, you have the pillars of cloud and fire, which we were talking about earlier, and that originates back in Exodus 13, verses 20 through 22. And then your final blank, again, notice the emphasis on compliance. There are orders, you comply with them. Verses 18 through 20 and 23. And that to me, that goes right hand in hand with what Steve was saying too about the convenience that we have. And I know I've referenced this verse a lot in this study, but we live under a better covenant that was established on better promises. One person on the live stream said this: what do you think about taking the Lord's Supper to someone who has to stay at home on a permanent basis? And not just the Lord's Supper, but a short sermon and singing. Well, I don't think there's anything wrong with that. Again, there's a difference in being sick and being homebound. There's absolutely a difference in those things. Or just not feeling well. So, there is, I've heard, obviously, and you guys, I know you have too, nursing home services where members of the church will go and offer a service to 1 or 2 or 3 members of the church, however many there are. Things like that. So, some things to think about there. And I think Numbers 9 draws out some good